It's all yours, Councillor Tilling.
Okay, thank you. And good morning and welcome to the Joint Waste Collection Services Committee, a quarterly meeting of councillors and officers from the 4 constituent authorities making up Joint Waste Solutions. Apologies for absence I've got from Councillor Dugan, who would normally chair the meeting, so I'm standing in as chair because I've been elected as the vice chair of this group. And welcome Councillor Robin Perry, who is substituting for Councillor Dugan. Do we have any other declared absentees?
I've not received any.
Okay, thank you. First item on the agenda is minutes of the last meeting, which we have in our published pack. Are there any comments, amendments, issues arising from those minutes? No, I can see no hands going up. So we'll accept those as a correct record of the meeting held on the 29th of September 2022. The third item is a declaration of interests, and I was reading this a little bit earlier. It's a slightly odd statement because it says members are invited to declare any interest that they may have in relation to any matters that are being considered at this meeting. Well, I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't have any interest in the meeting. I think, does it presumably, Catherine, it presumably means pecuniary interests?
Yes, it does. It's pecuniary, sorry, yes.
Okay, so members are invited to declare any pecuniary interests that they may have, missing word there, in relation to any matters that are to be considered at this meeting. Any declarations? Nope. Thank you very much. Okay, on to the first report. JWS Performance Report Q2, July to September 2022. To consider a report providing an update on the performance of the contract during the second quarter of this financial year. Is that Kelly?
That will be me. I'm stepping in for Kingsley this quarter, so I'll be delivering that report.
Okay, thank you, Alex.
Great, thank you very much. So yes, as we just said, this report is the quarterly update on the recycling performance across the joint contract. And this is up to and including September 2022. As you all know, that the annexes to the paper will provide you the details of the monthly performance data. And I'm just going to run through a quick summary of the data. So the first section of the report looks at an overall Surrey-wide trend, just to provide some context. And largely across Surrey, we have seen an overall decrease in tonnages being collected compared to the previous year. And this is as tonnages can stop to be impacted so significantly by COVID. I must start with an apology, as some of the figures in this report are currently slightly off. And this is due to some missing data for the CRCs that Surrey County Council operates on so across the county. So we haven't got that data included at the moment, and that has kind of overstated some of the differences. So this error will be fixed. It was only discovered this morning, unfortunately, so I've not had an opportunity to correct it. But I will be issuing an update to this report next week with some of these figures updated. Generally, the magnitude of the figures are kind of slightly overstated, but largely it is an overall reduction. I think one of the big things that we asked for this quarter was a comparison with the period up to 2019. And so I was just going to kind of give a verbal update on that and just inform you that we'll correct the figures kind of as we can do. So largely, we know that up to this year compared to last year, tonnages have started to decrease. Obviously, last year was some significant tonnages due to COVID. Compared to 2019, we haven't kind of got back to that level, but largely we've sort of probably a 1-2%, maybe a 3% difference this year compared to the 2019 pre-COVID year. So an apology for me in that the Surrey-wide performance isn't as accurate as it should be. I will get that updated early next week for everyone and update that report. Having a look at some of the sort of more specific trends across Surrey, we can look at food and DMR as these aren't impacted by the CRT tonnages as much. And across Surrey, we did see both these tonnages drop for all Ds and Bs. So there's a drop of 9.8% on food waste and an 8.7% drop in DMR. Compared to 2019, DMR has decreased by 2.2%. So we have kind of lost some DMR tonnages compared to pre-COVID, and food waste has actually increased by 2.9%. So we're continuing to collect a higher proportion of food waste than we were pre-COVID, which is good news. Residual garden waste tonnages are quite largely impacted by CRC tonnages, as councils do collect quite significant amounts of those the CRCs. But again, these are largely decreased since last year, and as well as 2019. But again, as I said, we'll update those tonnages as soon as we can. Moving on to the next section, which is focusing on the joint contracts. Looking broadly across the joint contracts in terms of some general trends, there has been a decrease across all 4 main material streams. And this is largely in line with the rest of the story. As I said before, there's a general decrease in tonnages being collected. The garden waste is still impacted by the disruption last year, because we're looking at moving annual averages, so it always captures the last 12 months worth of data. And so we are still seeing some of the impact of last year kind of feeding into these tonnages. But it's worth to say that in September, if we look at September in isolation, we are looking at kind of a seasonal norm for September, so showing that tonnages are where they were in previous years when we look at the sort of the seasonal differences. And that is despite quite a dry summer this year as well, which would have reduced the overall tonnages. Looking now just at each of the individual authorities, starting with Elmbridge. So if we look at the DMR tonnages, there is a decrease this year of 9.6% compared to last year, but we are still at 6.3% higher than 2019. So that shows we are collecting more DMR than we were pre-COVID. Food waste dropped by 11.6% compared to last year, and there's a 2.1% drop compared to pre-COVID. Residual waste is 6.1% lower than last year, but it's 3.2% higher than pre-COVID. So we're collecting more residual waste at Elmbridge than we were in 2019. And garden waste is about 5% lower for both periods. Fly tipping, we've seen a further decrease in this year compared to 2021 of 38 tonnes, and quite a significant difference from 2019 of 147 tonnes. So that's a really positive story there. In terms of recycling rates, the performance for Q2 was 52.2%, and the moving annual average, which kind of replicates what it could be for a 12-month period, is 49.2%. So we do normally see a bit of differences in the quarterly rate and the moving annual average just because of the seasonal variation in recycling performance. Moving on to Mole Valley. DMR, we saw a 9% decrease in collected DMR tonnages compared to last year, a 1% decrease compared to pre-COVID. Food waste, we've got a 8.6% reduction compared to last year, but we are collecting about 5% more food waste this year than we were in 2019. Residual waste, again, we've reduced that this year compared to last year by 5%, although we are collecting about 5% more residual waste this year than we were pre-COVID. And again, with garden waste, it's around a 20 to 25% reduction in both 21 and 2019. In terms of fly tipping for Mole Valley, there is an increase compared to both years, 44 tonne increase compared to last year, and a 38 tonne increase compared to 2019. The recycling rates for Q2 is 54.1%. Looking, we've got a 7% decrease in DMR compared to 2021. And compared to 2019, we notification that our internet is unstable. Looking at food waste, there was a 7.7% drop compared to last year, and a 4.3% increase compared to 2019, to pre-COVID. So again, we're collecting more food waste this year than we were before COVID, which is again really positive. Residual waste, we've dropped from 5.9% compared to last year, but we are still 7.7% higher than we were in 2019. So we are collecting a higher amount of residual waste than pre-COVID. Again, garden waste has been about a 20% drop compared to last year, but this is only a 3.8% drop compared to 2019. And in terms of fly tipping, we've made some big progress here. There's 120 tons difference this year compared to last year, and 190 tons difference compared to 2019. Shows a consistent drop in tonnages there. Recycling rate for quarter 2 for Surrey Heath was 56.2%, and the moving annual average is 60.9%. Finally, moving on to Woking. For DMR, we have seen a 4.8% decrease in tonnages compared to last year, and compared to 2019, we're about a similar level again. Food waste, we've seen an 8.6% drop compared to last year, and a 1.4% drop compared to 2019. Residual waste has seen a 4.5% decrease compared to last year, and a 9% increase compared to 2019. So we're still collecting quite a lot of extra residual waste compared to pre-COVID. And garden waste drop off in garden waste tonnages. Fly tipping has also decreased. We were 45 ton decrease compared to last year, and 100 ton decrease compared to 2019. Recycling rates for Woking for quarter 2 is 52%, and the moving annual average is 49.9%. So the annexes with all these specific data for each of the authorities also includes authority-specific measures that are in the joint strategy. And the recommendation of this report is to discuss and comment, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Oh,
You are mute.
Thank you very much, Alex. Yeah, you were a little bit broken up at times, but I think we by reading through the notes, we managed to pick up nearly everything that you were pointing out.
Great. Apologies for that.
That's okay. It's interesting, isn't it? I'm not too sure why we would expect DMR in particular to be reduced for this year compared to COVID years, because in COVID years, everybody, most people were at home. People weren't taking holidays as much as they were. People weren't eating out. One would have expected, actually, that we'd have generated possibly even more waste when we were locked in at home than normal. So it's interesting that we've got this slight drop in figures across Surrey and across each of the boroughs. And it's also then interesting as to how you sort of try and work out whether it's a good thing or a bad thing that DMR is being reduced. I mean, you could argue that actually it's a bad thing, because it means people are being less disciplined about sorting out their recyclable waste. Could be a good thing, because it could mean that actually people are reducing what they're buying and they're reusing rather more. So a drop in the rate of DMR could actually be quite a good thing. I just wonder whether you might care to comment why you think that in general there's a drop between the COVID annual period and this current annual period. Oh, Alex, you seem to have frozen. We'll move on to Caroline. Caroline's got a question.
Caroline's got an answer, actually. I would respond to what you asked Alex, because the general drop in DMR is because of the impact of the government requiring packaging to be less. So there is less weight in all packaging going through the premises. So if the supermarkets, for example, are expecting to pay £200 a tonne on plastics for disposal eventually through the producer pays. So they have all been looking at lowering their packaging, hence less plastics to get loose fruit in, loose vegetables in. Some make you bring a little net bag, some will just expect you to do it loose. So that packaging disappears, and boxes are much, much thinner in cardboard and in plastic. So that's the direct result of the DMR. It is literally, that's government legislation actually showing its success. I think very little of it is recycling and reusing, in honesty, at home. I think it's all to do with that. The bit that I find really, after all the effort that we've put in on food waste, and admittedly Mole Valley is a bit behind because we've only just done the survey on it to the flats, but to find that, you know, we're still getting more is, again, we're asking people to reuse and be careful about buying, and there's more coming through, but it's not a huge amount more. So I think on the whole, we're doing quite well in seeing everything drop, which is what really we should have. We should have everything dropping, but basically due to the government legislation slowly coming in and working.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks, Caroline. I think some excellent points there. Alex, I see you're back with us. Did you want to make any sort of comment?
Yes, sorry about that. I think I got most of your points, Councillor Tinning, and I joined for the kind of final bit of Councillor Salmon's points. I think, oh, have I gone again?
We can still hear you.
Great. Okay. Perfect. Sorry, I'm going to turn the camera off, and I'm hoping that might help with my internet. Yes, it's interesting actually. I think during COVID there was a huge spike in the amount of tonnages being collected because people were, you know, everyone was at home for prolonged periods of time and working from home and kind of doing everything at home, and that meant that the amount of material that could be recycled at home shot up as well. I think what's happening now is we're kind of returning back to some sort of normality, although we know a lot of people are still continuing to work from home, but everyone is, you know, still back out and about. Hospitality is where it was pre-COVID, and it's not that necessarily less recycling is being produced. I think it's where it's going to be disposed, because not people aren't as home as often. Generally the tonnages have started to drop, and it's that kind of return to normal that I think we're seeing here, and the proportions of it is slightly changing as well. So we might be seeing recycling drop at a higher rate than residual, which means that that's going to have a bit of an impact on our recycling rate, because there's still quite a high level of residual waste in the material streams. I think in terms of the food waste, I think the good news is that we're providing the service to more people, and people are kind of participating in that service. So although we do want overall food waste to reduce, we are capturing more of it that would have normally gone into the residual bin. And I think higher food waste tonnages is probably quite a good thing, although we do want to see the overall amount of food waste drop. If we can capture more of it in the food waste service, that would be a really positive thing. You or me, Councillor?
There we are. Sorry about that. Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. Any other comments or questions? Okay, thank you very much. I see that in our papers on page 11, it goes into the SEP joint strategy performance Q1, but that doesn't seem to be listed on the agenda item, Catherine. Should we go into SEP joint strategy performance now?
I believe that's just at the bottom table on each of the annexes. So.
Okay. Right. So we can skip over that. That's all just the underpinning data for Alex's report. Okay. Right. So the next item is item 5, which is the AMI contract improvement plan. Is that Danielle?
It is, Councillor Tilly, and as always, I have some slides to share with you.
Thank you.
If I may, we can confirm if we can see those.
Yes.
Okay, that's good morning, everyone. I'm just going to take you through some areas of interest since we last spoke, and then the improvement plan for AMI for this year. So to cover in the slides this morning, an update on business continuity plans, an update on garden waste, an update on leafing, and then an update on health and safety and our people that work for us. And then I'll just cover off the elements of the improvement strategy that we've moved forward since we last spoke, and then questions at the end. So firstly, an update on the business continuity plans. So when we had the strike action in August, it highlighted some opportunity for us to improve our ways of working, particularly when our day-to-day operation is compromised. With this in mind, we have conducted a review of the business continuity plans and feel that having a singular continuity plan to cover the 4 sites and scenarios that are likely to cause mass disruption to services is the way forward. We have now shared the updated business continuity plan with JWS. JWS have carried out a first review of that and provided us with some feedback. The next step is for us to develop a working group consisting of various members of our team, and we're happy to work jointly with JWS if they'd like to have members of their team join that working group as well. This will be with the aim to review and finalise the business continuity plan. Once the plan has been finalised, a third-party consultant will be brought in to test the resilience of the plan. This will involve a consultant giving a scenario for us all to go away and respond to in a live environment, which will then generate some further feedback and suggest any amendments and action plans that need to be implemented as a result of that scenario testing. That's due to be completed by March 2023. An update on the garden waste. So weekly meetings take place between JWS and Amy to provide a summary on the payments that have been received and also how bin retrieval processes are going. So we've been aware of a few issues whilst working through this process. There was an issue with the end dates with residents that had more than 1 container. So if those residents received an email to renew their subscription, there was issues with them receiving that email, and we've rectified that by ensuring that all residents with more than 1 container are written to rather than emailed. We've had a few complaints that we have removed containers without residents being notified, but when we've dug into those individual addresses and investigated, we've been able to confirm that communications were sent. So it may just be that residents were looking for a letter versus an email that was sent to them. And then lastly, we were notified that there were some residents who were unable to make payment and their worksheet has been cancelled. That was a technical issue with Whitespace. It's been raised with them and now resolved. In terms of Surrey Heath, there are 11 properties with a service end date of 2099. So those properties still need to be investigated and the resident written to. In Woking, they are slightly further behind with that and still have over 2,000 properties that they still have an open end date with. So we are working to resolve those and we're looking at plans to increase how many containers we can collect in a day to speed that process up so that it's not ongoing for a long period of time. An update on leafing. So in the previous 2 years, we've subcontracted out the work for leafing to a third-party company. However, this year we've decided to bring these works back in-house due to the uplift in price by the third party. Leafing runs for a period of 12 weeks and usually starts around the middle of October, although it's difficult to predict exactly when leaf fall will begin. So in Surrey Heath, Mole Valley and Elmbridge, we will deploy an additional 2 large mechanical sweepers to cover that 12-week period who will have specific leafing routes. So below just demonstrates the progress of each of those areas. So Elmbridge has run to time on that schedule. They had their additional large mechs in place and drivers ready to go from the 17th of October. Surrey Heath, we were fortunate enough to be able to deploy one of those routes sooner than the 17th, but unfortunately one route started 2 weeks later, so that just cancels them out and puts them back on track. Where we have seen issues is in Mole Valley, and that was due to the fact that there were absences for those drivers that we have selected to train and put onto those leafing routes. We also had selected agency staff to come in at that time in addition, but unfortunately after completing a week's induction with us, the driver decided that he didn't want to do the role, so that put us behind slightly. So whilst we were waiting for those drivers to become available, we sent out an additional caged vehicle. So instead of sending out 2 large mechanicals, we've then had a large mechanical plus a caged vehicle out. And for the past 2 weeks, we've been in the position where those 2 large mechs are able to be, we've deployed for the last 2 weeks, the large mech and the extra cage vehicle Since the beginning of this week, we've had 2 large mechs and the cage vehicle out. So there's actually 3 routes out in Mole Valley now attempting to catch up on that work that has been missed. And we will also look to extend the leafing programme beyond the 12 weeks in Mole Valley to make sure all works are completed. An update on people and health and safety. So as reported at previous meetings, recruitment has stabilised across the contract areas and we are able to attract new candidates and fill vacant roles without difficulty. Over previous months, we've seen an increase in the number of incidents involving members of the public, whereby our employees have felt threatened by the behaviour of residents. These have either been over miscollection disputes or driving incidents. So I had inserted a video into the slideshow, but I've since removed it due to the fact that we're recording, but I'm happy to share it with you offline. But essentially the number of cases we're seeing whereby drivers are blocking the road because they feel like they don't want to wait for the collections to take place before they overtake the refuse vehicle. On the video that I did have inserted on this slide, the transit van driver pulls up and blocks the driver's door and tries to offer the driver out to fight him in the street. He then has to reverse down the road quite a significant distance because he can't get past the vehicle. And as soon as he sees an opportunity, he mounts the pavement to overtake the vehicle. But what he doesn't realise is that the loader is working at the rear of the vehicle. So he nearly runs over the waste collection operative who is working on the pavement. As I said, these instances are increasing quite significantly. And JWS is supporting, we're kind of reviewing that footage, but I think collectively we could all do a little more in trying to communicate with the residents that we serve around these behaviours. On to the improvement strategy. So I've highlighted in blue the things that have moved forward since the last time we spoke. So now in terms of garden waste, Surrey Heath and Woking, all existing accounts have been aligned. Action is still in place with Whitespace to offer residents the opportunity to add a further container throughout the year and bring that end date for that additional container in line with their initial subscription. The Whitespace development, the 3 bottom actions on that still remain live and are ongoing with Whitespace. KPIs, so since the strike, we've been able to kind of reinstate business as usual. We're having monthly discussions with all site teams, and if you go into any of the depots now, you'll see kind of leagues and leaderboards up on the wall of crew performance. A point to note is that Elmbridge are struggling to kind of compete with the other contract areas in terms of their missed collections due to the disconnect between CRM and Whitespace. There's a manual process that needs to take place between those 2 systems in order for the performance to be accurate, which could be around 2 to 3 hours work per day for someone to go through in a supervisory level. So we're trying to resolve that as an interim, but ideally we'd like to push as soon as possible to have Elmbridge integrate onto Whitespace. In terms of improvements in our fleet process, we've put some contingencies in place now whereby our fleet team are able to go direct to local suppliers for parts. Historically, we've seen issues with waiting for parts for 2 to 3 months, but we're trying to rectify as much of that as possible by giving them freedom to go and spend with local suppliers, which they can then arrange collection of the parts and get the vehicles back on the road sooner rather than later. In terms of safety, work jointly with JWS to review the route round risk assessments. There was a weekly call in place for each of the 4 contract areas joint with JWS. However, that process didn't prove beneficial and the estimated timescale for completing that was around 6 to 8 months, which I think we all agreed we'd like to get it moving sooner than that. So a new approach has now been agreed, but this requires the process to be rewritten before rollout. So we're looking to agree that process by the end of December and communicate that with JWS and our operational teams. Given the work that we've been doing on safety on the contract recently, we've seen an increase in number of employees shouting out regarding safety concerns. So this is where our employees will have the confidence to stop work and stop the operation in order to report any unsafe condition that they feel is going on around them. And we're really trying to empower our employees to do that and drive the safety culture in a positive way. Just a few points to note that aren't covered on that improvement plan. The food waste expansion in Surrey Heath has been a success. So in September, we worked with the Surrey Heath project, the JWS project team, to increase the food waste collections in communal properties. We did a phased rollout so that we can measure the performance and ensure that it worked. And we're still continuing to review the performance of that in terms of tonnages collected, etc. We look forward to supporting further projects such as this in other areas within our remit. I've already touched on the review of the fleet workshop and kind of our plans in place for obtaining parts sooner. And then the final point there is just the salary advance tool. So we've responded to concerns of our employees around the current cost of living, etc. And we've given our employees an opportunity to advance some of their salary that they've earned within the month. So they don't have to wait to the end of the month to draw all of their, or to be paid their full salary at halfway point through the month or 3/4 of the way through. They can request up to 50% of their wages that they've already earned within that month. The feedback has been really positive. We're supporting those employees who wish to take up the service. And it's offered as an alternative to payday loans, which have significant interest rates. There are no interest rates on this. It is just an advance of their salary. And that is it from me. I'll take questions, please.
Good. Thank you very much, Danielle. Does anybody have any questions? Nick.
Firstly, just to say, I think that salary advance is a really positive thing, especially at the moment. So thank you for that. I think that's going to be really well received, as you say. A couple of questions. The first one was around the garden waste renewal letters. Do you have any figures that you can share, especially in relation to Surrey Heath, clearly, in terms of the numbers of complaints you've had about the dates for renewals being incorrect?
I don't have them to hand, Nick, but I'm happy to gather those offline and send them over to you so you've got full sight of them. That's not a problem.
Lovely, thank you. And the second question was in relation to the food waste and the initiative that you've done in Surrey Heath. When are we likely to see anything by way of benefit figures in terms of the tonnages that have been increased, I suppose, as a consequence of that?
I think more one for JWS.
Yeah, if it helps to, if I chip in there, the projects team will do some post monitoring of the sites where that's been introduced. So we'd expect as part of their feedback on the rollout to provide us with some figures, but obviously those tonnages are coming through now, and they'll be doing some work to help identify how well used that service is at the respective sites.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
And Mark.
Oh, hi there. Yes, thank you. I understand that we're a little bit behind on the bin deliveries in Woking, but I think behind that seems to be linked to perhaps a shortage of drivers due to some health and safety issues recently. I wondered if you had any further update. It wasn't mentioned in the report there.
It's a very short-term issue. We have 2 drivers in for assessment on Saturday morning. So as I said in the people update, we're not struggling to get staff. That was a particular incident that's related in us being short over a very short period of time, but I don't expect it to be an ongoing issue.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you. If I could just raise a few points. So you mentioned that there was an email or a letter going out to those with more than one container. Why was there a need to do that? Are we trying to reduce them from more than one container to just one container?
No, I believe the issue was, Councillor Tilling, that when a resident had an account set up for more than one container and they were being emailed, the email didn't necessarily get through to the resident. So now we're writing via post to those residents so that the system does the full circle loop. We definitely don't want to reduce the amount of containers they have.
Oh, right. Okay, thanks. You also mentioned the 2 extra sweepers that we've got in most of the boroughs, 3 of the boroughs.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned there 2 leafing routes. I just wonder whether it might be worth communicating those leafing routes so that residents knew what the schedule was, and perhaps working with Amy so that the routes could be signposted in some way, so that residents knew what those routes were. Cars could be moved off the verge, and we could make sure that that there aren't parked cars in the way of those leafing routes. So what I'm saying is perhaps a little bit better publicity and communication. We might find the road sweeping a little bit more effective than it is at the moment.
I think so. At the end of every leafing period, we get together with JWS and have a follow-up from the previous 12 weeks and suggest areas for improvement, etc. And I'm happy to add that on for that discussion so that we can greater improve what we do next year. The leafing routes are just a cycle of roads to be swept without specific dates aligned to them, but I suppose we can look back over how frequently the roads were swept on that cycle this time round, and we could perhaps have an indicator as to when they would take place the following year. So happy to add that to the review meeting for best practice, etc.
Okay, thank you. I think thank you for your communication on the incidents involving members of the public being incredibly offensive to some of the drivers, and you mentioned that obviously if we could perhaps communicate slightly better to residents, that what is acceptable and what's unacceptable behaviour. So some sort of communication there, and I wonder whether perhaps JWS are picking up on that, so we can alert people to A, how to behave, but B, what to do when they see misbehaviour.
I think they definitely are. So we've had we've definitely shared video footage with JWS, who have then done some posts on social media, etc. I'm just conscious that the situation doesn't seem to be improving, and the amount of people that are mounting pavements to overtake bin lorries, when the reality is that anybody could be on that pavement because you can't necessarily see round a 26-ton vehicle.
Mr. Tilling, I just wanted to add, we've got other contracts, highway contracts in particular, where we have similar issues, where people are mounting the pavement and driving at our operatives. In Staffordshire, we actually had the cabinet member for transport go on the local media and actually, they showed a video, and he made a plea really to, for people to behave better and respect the people on the doing the highway work. So we'd appreciate any help from the local authorities and actually publicising this with the media, and also, I mean, we'll report these to the police as well, and sometimes they can intervene if we get a registration number.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thanks, George. I guess it's mostly frustration, people held up in lots of traffic and they don't want to sit behind a refuse vehicle for minutes on end. But yes, I think clearly some messaging would be useful on that.
I just say that if I could just say that the incident that Daniel's talking about, there was no traffic at all. It was in a very minor road. It's just impatience, but also aggressiveness, and what they actually do is, some of the things they do is actually a driving offence, as they can be prosecuted for it. And I wouldn't want to sort of try and make an excuse for anybody saying it's frustrating sticking behind a truck. This is from a health and safety point of view, it's extremely concerning for us.
Yeah, thanks. It's appalling. Caroline, I wonder whether I should go to Pat next, because we're talking about sort of communication issue, and then come to you after Pat.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to come in to say, yes, obviously we are very supportive of trying to get these messages out, and what we try and do is, if we've got footage that's usable, then we'll use that in the communications. I guess what I would say is that I think the response that we get is extremely supportive of the crews, and I think the problem is that it isn't necessarily the average resident of Surrey that is actually behaving this way. I thought it was interesting that Danielle mentioned the white transit van. I suspect some of this is actually people who are traversing the county, working in the county. They're not necessarily and I think the difficulty we have is in reaching and communicating with those people who are actually the people who are the offenders, if you like. What we tend to find is when we communicate about this, that people are outraged. You know, they are very supportive. They are, you know, and I guess that's the challenge. I mean, I don't know what routes there are in terms of, you know, reporting some of these things. I think, George, you were saying that these are offences. So I guess I assume, Danielle, that the crews are doing that, taking registrations, reporting that kind of thing. So there may be more redress there if those, you know, people are, you know, challenged on that sort of behaviour more directly. But, you know, we will obviously continue to do what we can. But I think the challenge in this is that, you know, the average resident of Surrey is possibly not always the person that's doing this, or certainly not the ones that are reading the communications about it, because those people are very supportive. But I think as a, you know, it's a particular type of person that will do this sort of behaviour.
Okay, thanks, Pat. Joe had a hand up, but I guess that's probably what you were going to say has been covered by Pat.
Yeah, I think Pat, you know, sort of offering to chip in as well on the things that Pat has covered off. But I think the only other thing that where we can potentially add some value is you know, talking to the local police teams to see if we can you know, work more closely with them in any way on any of these incidents. You know, obviously, as Daniel says, they're reported, but that's probably the only other thing I would wanted to add to what Pat's fed back in terms of the comments.
Okay, thanks. Caroline.
Yeah, back to leafing again, and I appreciate getting some information about what went wrong in Mole Valley, because certainly in the rural villages it's particularly bad this year, but mostly along the footpaths because of the acorn crop, and it's quite dangerous. So I'm hoping that when you're coming around the villages and doing the sweep, which I think probably haven't been done properly yet, you will be looking at clearing the footpaths as well, because they have been particularly bad. And I'm slightly concerned that one is a cage van, because that's an awful lot of work to fill up a cage van with leaves. Presumably sweep them, put them in bags, and then put them in the cage. So I hope that your two large mechanicals are now really doing a schedule around the villages, because as I was discussing in a pre-meeting, we have a lot of grass in the curbs that really need to be swept up now. If they're not swept up now, they will become very well fixed, and then they'll be worse. So what's Amy's view on giving us a schedule for the more rural areas, particularly in Mole Valley?
Thank you, Councillor Salmon. I'm happy to send over those leafing lists to you for the villages and provide an update in terms of percentages that those routes are complete against. I can get that over to you, that's not a problem. And then just taking feedback on the cage vehicle. So the feedback from JWS on that, Agogo in particular said that the cage vehicle was producing a higher quality of work in terms of leafing, because they are a crew that are blowing out those footpaths. When obviously the sweeper can't mount to go up onto the pavement, you require an assistant out with them to blow the footpaths out, which is taking place. But the feedback in general was that the cage vehicle was proving to be pretty productive and positive. So they're not doing any kind of manual handling that they shouldn't be doing. It has been risk assessed. And we'll just try and keep that additional resource in there to try and catch up on some of.
Can I make a request particularly? There's one path, I know it'll go through others, but there's a path from Wootton down into Westcott, which has been cleared by Surrey, and it is absolutely full of leaves, and it has to be manually swept. So when that comes back on your list of Surrey paths, as you may not even have it on your list to sweep, but it's from the Wootton Hatch down into Westcott, and it really does need. It needs a hand gang with a lot of plastic bags.
I drive in that way, Councillor Salmon, so I know what you're talking about.
See if you could do something about it, please. Thank you very much.
No problems.
Okay, thanks. I was just going to make one other point. You had on your slides possibility of electric sweepers. So I wonder whether you can give a bit more information about that. You know, how many sweepers do we have in total? Who owns them? Because I understood that vehicles are actually owned by councils rather than by Amy. And what sort of progress are you making on changing them to electric?
Thank you, Councillor Tilling. So we currently don't have any electric fleet within our sweeper fleet. There are a number of sweepers and caged vehicles that are due for replacement at 5 years through the contract. So they've come up for renewal now. So we are just exploring with JWS what type of vehicle would be best to put in place, given the time left on the contract, the technology that is currently available, because with the electric fleet of vehicles, you see kind of vast improvements over quite a short period of time in terms of 12 to 18 months. Will there be something that's much better available on the market? So we're just looking at options and don't want to jump the gun of those replacements, either by just replacing like for like and putting petrol diesel vehicles back out there, or by jumping the gun and putting an electric fleet out that isn't suitable for the task required. So that is a watch this space.
But would the replacement be a cost to councils, or would that be a cost to Amy? Who actually owns the vehicles?
Joe?
Yeah, stuck my hand up at the last minute there. Yeah, the vehicles are financed by the authorities and then operated by Amy. So yes, that the funding for them would come through the authorities, and that was set out from the start of the contract that some of these would need replacing. Just to add to what Danielle said, we had a useful meeting that George facilitated setting up with the fleet team at Amy to understand sort of where we're at in terms of development of electric vehicles and the different vehicle size classes and the challenges, and sort of that we're on the cusp of some changes potentially of new vehicles coming out to the market. So it's about timing that procurement at the right times to get the best option, and having a strong business case for whichever avenue we ultimately go down. But, you know, the technology and the carbon impact versus the you know, longevity and reliability of the vehicle.
And what sort of numbers of sweepers and caged vehicles are we talking about?
Oh, you're testing me. I can't remember off the top of my head, I'm afraid. But yes, effectively the streets fleet was always programmed to be being replaced from this midpoint in the contract. I would have to pull a separate list together. I'm afraid I'm not. My memory doesn't serve me well enough to pull that one out of the bag. It's a number of sweepers of varying sizes, and again, Amy, if they feel that what was originally specified is best slightly tweaked in terms of size or flexibility of the type of vehicle, then we want to understand that too, and the cages too. But I'm happy to provide a summary of that later if that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. Okay, that would be useful. Danielle.
I think I just looked it up. It's around 8 sweepers of different sizes. Majority of those are small mechanical, so around the 4-ton size, and then 10 street cleansing cage vehicles, some of which are 3.5 ton and some are 7.5 ton.
Oh, okay, so it's not a vast number. Okay, so yeah, I mean, we're obviously trying to make our council operations as carbon neutral as possible before 2030. So some sort of trial of, you know, perhaps a caged vehicle or a sweeper over the next year or so would actually be quite useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things I was interested in the conversation with the fleet team was the you know, what we need to consider in terms of vehicle weights and payloads when you're talking about electric vehicles, and the implications that has on who's able to drive them. You know, those cages are small, 3.5 ton, 7.5 ton. The battery impact of that means that an already relatively small payload on those vehicles, what they can actually put on and then have to go and tip, is impacted. And it's you know, it's finding the right balance between whether currently an electric vehicle serves a purpose and doesn't create other problems with who's able to drive it and that sort of issue. So yes, definitely an interesting and complex one to try and get the best case out of.
Well, it might be that we sort of follow the lead of JCB in producing hydrogen-based, you know, diggers and dumpers, and skip the electrical generation. Caroline.
Yeah, there's been an amount of discussion at the Surrey Environment Partnership, which Kelly obviously is very involved in, about the right vehicles for the right job, because it depends on distance they have to travel plus weight they have to carry. And the electrical vehicles are really only good in short areas because they don't have a very long battery life. And the ones that are being used in the Surrey Connect trial in the north of Mole Valley only actually have an 80-mile radius, and the new ones coming in only have a 90-mile radius, and they have to go back to the fast charge sockets if they run out of juice, and there aren't many fast charge sockets. They're slow, tend to be slower ones coming in. There are more coming in very rapidly, but I think the comment made by Ashley is right. The hydrogen vehicles are by far going to be more important in this sort of business than the electric ones. But of course, we do have Johnson Engineering in Dorking, and maybe there should be a point where somebody talks to Johnson Engineering and gets an electric vehicle out of them to go on trial, because they'll be very close at hand if something goes wrong, and we need to know and use it sort of almost as a trial for them to see how they do work on really being used, particularly on a pavement sweeper, because it will not go a huge way out of the town. And that would be a really interesting thing to do. So hopefully someone will listen to that, approach Johnson and see if we can get a good price, a good deal on something which we can take in on trial ourselves, help them to sell their vehicles.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. I think that's some good points. Is that something then, Joe, that JWS will carry forward?
We expect, sorry, my thing's just being emptied, so I'm a bit distracted. Yeah, I think we've got another round of conversations to have with the Amey Fleet team, because I know Mark on the contract and some of the sort of more colleagues were exploring a few options. I'm sure Johnson would have been on the list for sweepers because they're an existing supplier. So it's about understanding what's available on the market now, what we think is going to come in the not too distant future, and lead times, etc., to make sure we're considering all the variables.
And Kelly.
Yeah, so obviously, as Councillor Salmon has said, you know, I've got kind of double hat here. So I've got the SEP side as well as the joint contract. And from a SEP perspective, we are looking at kind of an infrastructure and transport delivery plan for the future, which looks at what vehicles and what infrastructure, what charging infrastructure we're going to need to meet that 2030 target that you've been alluding to. So there is discussions around looking at, you know, bringing in some vehicles for trials, and I take Councillor Salmon's suggestion that we contact Johnson's, and that's something that we will pick up and action and see if there is, you know, an agreement to be had as to how we could perhaps take that forwards. But yeah, it's going to be now we've got SEP 2025 going through the, you know, approval adoption process. Looking at the infrastructure side of things is going to be our next big thing, as well as obviously linking that in with what could be a change to collection methodologies depending on the policy direction that we get from government.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments on the contract improvement plan? If not, I think we better move swiftly on to item number 6, which is JWS quarterly budget report.
Good afternoon, members. I'm covering the report for Marco this afternoon. I could give you a quick update on where the financial position at the end of Q2 on the 3 main budget areas. On the CMO budget, the forecast spend for the year is 2.330 million, which it relates to an underspend of 61,000 against the set budget. And Marco has split that variance out on page 21 of the report. Regarding the contract, the 2 contract variances, on the core contract, there's a forecast overspend of 330,000, and this is related to inflationary figures which we used in the budget. We set the budget at 4% inflation, while the actual final figures 6.71%. On the variable contract variance, the picture is still unclear because there are some issues with the variable invoicing, which in order then to allow us to calculate any meaningful full year variances. But JWS have provided some estimated forecasts on page 22 of the reports, which have been split out. And they're estimated that the garden waste underspend will cover all the overspends within the 4 areas excluding the market supplements. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Adrian. Any questions on that report? No, that's it. We've all been baffled by the figures. So good, we'll move on. And so a programme progress update from JWS.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to start on updating on the sort of operational side of the programme of work, and then hand over to Pat for some of the communications engagement work. So thank you. I will start by noting that we've in this version of the report, or this current version of the report, we've looked to take some steps to take on board previous comments and feedback that we've had. So you'll see now that in that front page, there's now a sort of highlight section, which gives some pulls out some key points that we would have delivered some progress on in the most recent weeks and the current period being reported on. And we have looked to be a little bit more specific on some of the timescales and some of the elements of work that are being delivered. And given we know it's quite a lengthy document, be concise on the updates where we can slim them down. So I wanted to pick out a few areas where I think there's been some positive progress. We've had some work ongoing on what we'll call the complaints project, which is Matt Pearson in the East Operations team has done some very helpful mapping of some of the process issues that we have in terms of dealing with complaints. So he's been able to look at some of the high volume or more complex areas where complaints seem to take longer than we think they should to resolve, and identify really pinch points where we think we can make some improvements to the process. He's also been tracking who deals with what elements of particular types of inquiries across the 4 areas, so we can look to be more consistent in the way we're handling different types of inquiries in the 4. There's a series of actions that we think we can take forward that we'll be discussing with Amy, and also with in particular Elmbridge and Mole Valley, where we know we've still got some work to do on the integration of IT systems. This hopefully are some recommendations where we can make some small changes in the white space system in terms of job codes and things like that will enable us to get better feedback on complaint types, reduce contact points and double handling, or as I say, as we work with Mole Valley and Elmbridge on the integration of systems to embed some slight process changes that will mean we do things a bit more in a streamlined way than we do currently. As Adrian's just mentioned in the budget update, there's been some delays in processing some of the variable invoices, but I think we've gained quite a bit of momentum on this in the last few weeks. This ultimately stems from the change in IT system, which has meant we are, the backing data for those invoices being produced in a slightly different way, and we're taking more time to review and audit that before those are passed for payment, because the data is presented in a new format. As I say, we are catching up, and we are seeing some good progress on that. So I'm hopeful that pre-Christmas we'll have seen the bulk of the year-to-date invoices have been processed and approved, which is will bring us back on track. Alongside that, we've been looking at the KPI figures, because the principle is that any deductions that apply within the month to the contractor are included on the variable invoice as a reduction, and we want to make sure that agreeing those figures isn't holding anything up there. Again, this is an area where we know there's some better ways we can work with Amy using the white space data, and collectively we've got some work to do to see how we can make the best of the reporting functionality there to streamline the invoicing process and make it more straightforward for both them and us in terms of exporting that data and putting it in a format that we can review promptly. I might be stealing Pat's thunder on the next one, because we had an email yesterday to say the video that the teams have been working on, that's the operations and comms teams, to highlight issues with contamination in recycling bins, has finally become, the last bits of edits on that have been done now, and that's now finally ready for us to kind of review and sign off. So sorry, Pat, we didn't get a chance to talk about who was going to talk about that. So yeah, that's really exciting. We had done a programme, undertaken some work with depot teams to do some refresher training on contamination with crews. We think that was really effective, but obviously it's very time consuming for our teams to go in and take up the times of the crews after they finish their day's work to run through that with them. So we've moved it on a step to create a video that covers all the same information. It's something that we hope will, once it's got that final sign off, can be used either for refresher training with existing staff or as part of the induction process for new staff. So yeah, very close to that being a live action that's taking place. The last area I was going to touch on with health and safety. The final depot audit report has now been shared with Amy, and we've set up a series of regular meetings with the respective teams who've worked on that to track the progress against the actions that we've identified as needing to be taken as a result of those audits. And in terms of our own JWS team health and safety, we've reviewed our own guidance on processes around lone working and are close to finalising a new protocol for staff, which brings all the relevant information they need if they're working on their own together into one place. So that's been a really important piece of work for our own team, and glad to say that that's nearly ready to sign off too. Those were my bits that I wanted to talk about, so I'll let Pat update you on the rest.
Thank you, Jo. You didn't steal my thunder. I think that actually falls under one of the objectives that you normally talk about. But the only thing I would say to add to that is that that video has been done completely in-house. So there's been no cost for that. We have the skills in my team to do the creation of videos like that, and Jo's team are very happy to do things like voiceovers, and we've had members of the crew that have been filmed to feature in it. So it's been a collaborative piece of work, and I think it'll be a really useful one, as I said, in terms of education going forward. So we are pleased to say that that's now been done. In terms of a few other things just to mention, sort of starting under objective 3, service delivery comms. In that period it started obviously with the strike recovery work. We then had some other events to respond to, so there were further heatwave conditions at the back end of August, and then the extra bank holiday for the Queen's funeral. Then we did some leafing comms work. As was discussed earlier, if we can get more information on the planned schedule for that, then we'd be very happy to share more about that and publicise that in future. We also need to remind people that cardboard needs to be dry to be collected for recycling, because it's been very wet. Obviously with every season there are new messages to communicate about bin collections and what can and can't be done. This section covers the JWS website, which we manage in-house, and the views and most visited pages. And just to mention, in an update to that, we've been spending some time looking at this in more detail, and we're about to start work on a refresh, which is designed to make it easier for residents to find what they're looking for. So just to give you an idea of the sort of things we've been looking at, the most visited page you'll see, and this is consistent in the report, is the Check My Collection Day. So we're going to make that easier to find wherever people are on the website. So we'll be adding that as a main item to the top bar at the top of the website. The guide to collections is also one that's frequently visited, and food waste and garden waste in particular feature in the sort of top 10 most visited pages. So we're simplifying that section and making it easier and quicker for people to get to that information. Conversely, the recycling centre pages don't get a lot of visits, but it's in the main menu. So we're going to change that and combine it with the search tool that we have, which residents can use into a what to do with an item. So again, make it a bit more straightforward for people to get to the information and advice that they need. And then in other areas, we'll be doing things like combining sections to streamline it and taking out duplicate content. And obviously we'll be letting teams know about changes that will affect any links that are on the individual council websites, to make sure that there are no kind of broken links or things like that along the way. Moving on to objective 4, you'll see that from September to early November, the Surrey Environment Partnerships campaign primarily focused on encouraging residents to recycle more food waste, but food reduction was also included, particularly at the moment with messaging that links into the cost of living crisis. It's a good opportunity to try and encourage people to, buy and cook less food in the first place. Currently, that campaign, and obviously, all of that, as you know, gets amplified in the joint contract area with additional activity. The current phase of the campaign is focusing on the festive season, not surprisingly. Started a few weeks ago with kind of trying to encourage people to make sustainable choices when they're shopping and planning for Christmas. Now that we're into December, we'll be talking more about the recycling of things like cardboard boxes and envelopes, and also planning food to try and avoid too much food waste over Christmas. And the campaign runs into early January to make sure that people are recycling their Christmas cards and paper correctly, and things like they know what to do with their Christmas tree. Also, during that period, as well as the work on the contamination video, we've been trialling using some new RAP assets for a contamination campaign that's just run in the joint contract area rather than county-wide, ran for about 6 weeks from mid-September. So we'll be looking to evaluate that and all the work amplifying the SEP campaigns, and that'll all be included in the next report. We've also recently come to the end of the initial trial period for Rethink Waste that was trialled in Elmbridge. So we're now evaluating that to determine whether it's made an impact on waste reduction, and also looking at the crew exception reports to look at the interventions that were done to encourage residents to recycle more food waste in Elmbridge and Mole Valley, again, to see if those have made an impact. And then finally, all the recycling guides and calendars for 2023 have been delivered or should have been delivered by the middle of November. So those are the only things to mention. The recommendation is just simply to note the updates, but obviously both myself and Joe are happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much, Pat. I've certainly got my new calendar that came through the post about 10 days ago. Just to comment on the Rethink Waste, the Green Redeem scheme, we've recently sent out information to all our garden waste subscribers. So I'm rather hoping that it goes up from that rather static figure of 1,700 to a few more than that. I know it's only the last, we're into the last 3 months and we're not supporting any granting of money to schools, so that might remove a little bit of the motivation and the impetus for residents to join. But I rather hope that we're still going to climb above that sort of figure of 1,740 that we seem to have had for a number of months, because it's a good scheme. I'm a great fan of it.
And actually, I can tell you that email made a big difference. So I think at least 700, I think, were added to the last information I had.
Oh, great. Okay, that's useful to know. Right, are there any other questions on that detail? Now, I think we are invited then to agree. Oh no, that comes next. So I see there is a recommendation then that we need to agree the budget. Recommendation on page 43. Do we come to that later, or do we come to that now?
I think the recommendation on this item was just to note the report, Councillor Tilling. I think the budget is the next item.
Sorry. Okay, we'll just note that report. Yep. Getting slightly ahead of myself. I was asking at the pre-meeting whether Joe could give us some briefing information for the portfolio holders, but if I now see that the detail of the indices calculation is actually there on page 41, so that's quite useful. So we've probably got as much information as we need there, Joe. Anyway, again, jumping ahead, any other questions on the report that we've just received? No. Okay, so in that case we go on to the budget proposals 23 to 24 financial year.
Thank you. So I'm going to start and then Joe is going to come in afterwards. So I'm looking at the part around the JWS staff and overhead costs. So the staff and overhead costs are projected to be 205,000 higher for 23-24 than they are for 22-23. This is largely due to an increase in the salary costs. So we obviously fall under Surrey Heath Borough Council's administration. So they've recently implemented an 8% increase to salary costs. That's based on the fact that in previous years, there's either been a very small increase or no increase at all. So the 8% is largely to kind of bring everybody up to speed and comparison to other authorities. So that 8% increase will naturally have the largest impact and accounts for 193,000 of the £205,000 increase. Moving on from the salaries, we've then got team costs. So the team costs are pretty static in comparison to last year at 98,000. The largest of those costs relate to travel expenses, and naturally, monitoring the contract and stuff, we do need to have staff out travelling, to monitor that activity. There's support costs associated. So again, we receive our support from Surrey Heath Borough Council for legal, IT, HR, democratic services, finance and so on. Again, obviously they have received the 8% pay award, so that also has been applied. But this has been offset because the support that we receive from Marco has reduced. So Marco has had a reduction in the number of hours that he's going to be providing to JWS. So that, like I say, offsets largely the support costs. And then we've got office costs. So we pay just under £110,000 for our office location in Woking. We haven't made any assumptions around a reduction to that for this financial year. However, we are looking at the ways that we work and potential alternatives to how we function. So we've got a project going on at the moment that is considering, how much we utilise the office and if there are other offices that may be more suitable to our needs. So we haven't made any assumptions in the budget for this year around any savings on office costs. We do have to give 6 months notice on the lease that we've got for Duke's Court, but if we do decide to relocate, initially we would have relocation costs, but we would perhaps see a saving from 24-25 onwards. Health and safety support, so the figure that we've got there remains unchanged from this year at £2,500. And then we've got 3 areas that sit on the Joint Contract Authority only budgets. So the first one of these is around legal support. So we have obviously specific legal support provided by Surrey Heath, but also by external consultants. There's also some money in there for communications and engagements activity, and we've just been talking about the service guides. So we've had to increase the budget there by £13,000 because the costs associated with the production, so the paper, the print, as well as the posted costs have increased on that service. And then the remaining area that we've got is £2,500 for business continuity. And again, that remains unchanged from this year. I'll hand you over to Joe to go through the contract costs.
Thank you. So I'll start with the Amey contract costs, which are broken down to the core and variable charges. There are 2 stages to setting the budget on these areas. One is to review the quantities within the contract, which for the core really primarily involves a review of the household numbers and the uplift that we're likely to see based on new properties coming online in the following year. And for the variable charges, we review historic and anticipated quantities for things such as garden waste customers and those requiring assistance with their collections in order to establish a baseline for next year on those. And then we need to apply the uplift rate, which, as Councillor Tilling helpfully pointed out, there's a breakdown of how that calculation is arrived at on page 41 of the papers. In the past, we have, we always need to set that at this time and have a discussion about what the right level is of where we think that's going to be when the final calculation is done. It's completed in March and it's based on January figures, so they're not published until the March, which is why we can't get a final figure until very close to the beginning of the new financial year. In Annex 1, we've broken down those costs by authority and shown you what the proposed budget is, which is built in a figure of an uplift of 10% at this stage. That was following discussion with the finance leads to determine what we thought the most suitable level was that we can estimate at this stage of what that rate is going to be. To aid with budget setting, they asked that we put in a table which showed what the impact of an additional 1% would be and the equivalence of if we had set that at 8 or 12%. That was purely for information purposes, just to understand that. I've also included a separate table around the driver market supplement. This was a payment that was agreed to support Amey with in December last year. It was agreed separately to the budget last year, and there were further conversations around that in March and the rate that would be paid. I've set that out in a separate table because it does form a significant part of the change in the variable costs when you look at the budget for next year compared to this one, because obviously we'll count that as part of the variable budget going forward. There have been some ongoing discussions about the way that indexation is applied to the contract. That's referenced in this paper here. We haven't reached a final conclusion on that. There have been some discussions ongoing and an offer of a further meeting to talk about that proposal, but given that that hasn't been concluded, we have obviously stuck with the existing mechanism for the purposes of budget setting this year. Just moving on to the other elements of the contract budgets, we have other contract costs which are related to the management of wheat and textile material that's collected at the curbside. That was reduced significantly last year. We haven't removed it completely on the basis that we might incur some ad hoc costs if there are issues with contamination of the containers, but we've dropped it right down based on the fact that that doesn't appear to happen particularly frequently. The last items, which are the depot rental and business rates recharge and the savings guarantee, are mechanisms that were agreed at the start of the contract around cost sharing of the depots and a guarantee of particular level of saving as a result of jointly procuring the services. That doesn't change year on year, so they are, again, they're referenced there because they're part of the budget, but there isn't any difference to how that's been approached in previous years, and the figures are in the appendices on an authority basis. Obviously, Kelly and I will be happy to answer any questions on that, but then, as you pointed out, Councillor Tilling, the recommendation here is to ask the committee to agree these budgets and take them through to their individual authorities for individual approval.
Okay, thanks very much, Joe. I can make one point based on what Kelly was saying, is that £109,000 for office costs seems an awful lot of money, when certainly in our civic centre we've got ample room now that some 30 to 40% of people are working from home. We've got an awful lot of spare office space, and I guess other councils are probably the same. So, you know, one would have thought that rather than you renting and servicing Duke's Court, there is ample opportunity for moving into one of our civic centres. I don't know whether you've looked at that already, Kelly.
Yeah, so that is part of the project that we're doing. So we have been liaising with Ray and the property team at Elmbridge. We've also been liaising with the team at Woking Borough Council. So a lot of our staff are kind of based more around the Woking area. So if we can get something there, it would be the preference. We've obviously already got some people, you know, ad hoc working from Elmbridge who are servicing the east side of the operations. But that is very much what the project is looking at. We do need some, you know, small amount of storage as well for some of the projects and things that, you know, we deal with. So that's been taken into the specification of our needs as well. But we're hoping to bring that project to a close fairly soon and be able to kind of set out what our direction is. Like I say, there might be some initial costs associated with relocating that, you know, would fall into it. And if we do manage to realise any savings during the 23-24 financial year, then that will be a bonus. But we absolutely appreciate that, you know, that there is fairly high cost there in the offices that we're utilising, and that we could probably get better value for money.
Okay, thanks. Joe, could I just clarify the figures then, just a sort of final summary? So from the indexation percentages, you've got those three indices. Are you what you're saying is that all three taken together is you want an increase in the budget of roughly 10%? Is that correct?
That's right. So we've applied an assumption that the uplift rate will land around at 10%. The percentages that are in the table are the relative proportions that those different indices contribute to calculating that uplift rate. I'd be happy to share sort of how that calculation has tracked through the year to date, if that's helpful. I think that's, you know, when we were talking previously about this, that was what I thought might be beneficial to share, because that's not included in this particular document. So that will show how those indices are changing through the year to date, and what figures we have used to arrive at that 10% uplift rate that we have applied to the quantities to come up with this proposal for the budget for next year.
All right. Okay, thanks. Any other questions on the budget figures? Caroline, I think you made the point at last week's SEP that you're not too sure whether you're in a position to give your approval at this stage before it's gone through your cabinet.
You're pushing me. I've been told by the Section 151 officer, having had communication with her, her wording specifically is, I think you have to say that you reluctantly agree to it.
That's unlike you to have your arm twisted in that way, Caroline.
Oh, I'm getting old.
Oh, Ray, I thought your hand popped up and it's come down again. Did you want to say anything?
Only briefly, just to talk about just so there's clarity on where we stand as a committee. Yeah, this is a tier 1 decision in the agreement, in the joint working agreement. So all you can do as a committee actually is support it and recommend it on to your cabinet and council. So Caroline has that amount of cover. The only other thing to say, of course, is this is very frustrating because most of this is contractual. So there's little we can do about it. So I can understand the 151 comment, Caroline, and sympathise.
Okay. Thanks, Ray. And in fact, the recommendation is sort of worded as such, isn't it? It's the Joint Committee is asked to agree the 2023-24 JWS staff and overheads and joint contract budgets and commend them to their individual authorities for approval. So we're not sort of rubber stamping these, we're just saying we're going to forward them to our authorities for further approval. So I think that makes sense. Do we need to take any sort of vote on this?
We just say agreed.
Yeah, if I could just have a show of hands, that'd be great, just for the record.
Okay, that's all 4 portfolio holders putting their hands up. Okay, that makes it nice and straightforward. Good, thank you very much. So the last item on the agenda, you'll be pleased to know, is the date of future meetings. We've got the next proposed meeting is going to be Thursday, the 9th of March, 2023. If I can just say, Catherine, I have a problem with Thursday meetings in that I'm now working from work for this meeting, which doesn't go down terribly well. For me, a Wednesday meeting would be much better, but obviously it depends on anybody else whether Wednesdays is easier or more difficult.
So you want Wednesday the 8th of March?
So Wednesday 8th of March will be much better for me. I don't have to work from work. I can do council business from home.
I can send an email around outside the meeting and just to confirm that everyone can make that the Wednesday the 8th. I wouldn't like to commit Councillor Dugan to something that he's not going to turn up to.
Right. Okay, good. I think that would be useful just to circulate something. Excellent. Is there any other business? Any other comments or questions? No. Oh, good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Catherine, for organising and sending out the papers, and thank you everybody who's contributed. We'll see you in March, whatever the date is.
See you. Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.